Rent. A periodical payment made by an occupant of property to the owner for the residence thereof. In the United States, most of us are pretty familiar. 1 in 3 people rent their housing, and that number is only going up. And with it, the cost is also skyrocketing. And like always, the poor are left in the dust. Hi, my name is Jazzix, and today we'll be looking at the rent crisis, what caused it, as well as some short-term and long-term solutions. So, without further ado, take my hand and we'll dive right in. Before we get into hands-on solutions, we must first understand rent. And to understand rent, one must understand the system in which it exists. Now, we don't have time to dig into all of that right now. Trust me, I would love to crack open the literature. But the main thing we need to understand is the relationship that is supply and demand. In economics, the two main things that determine the price of an object are its availability and the willingness of a consumer to spend money. Basically, the higher the price, the higher the supply, because companies are willing to make more of it if they can sell for a higher price, and the lower the demand, as customers are less likely to buy it the more expensive it is. Note, price here does not necessarily equal value. Price is what the system uses in order to estimate the value, but it is not perfect. For example, let's say you decide to buy the latest iPhone on the day it releases, but you show up late and, oh no, all of the phones have been sold already. Very sad, I know. But there is someone out front who happened to buy a whole bunch of them, and they're willing to sell you one. Yippee! Well, ignore the fact that most phone stores only sell one new phone per person in order to prevent this exact situation from happening. There's just one problem. They want $1,000, which is $200 more than the original price. Now, the value of the phone didn't just go up because somebody else bought it. They're able to do this because, due to limited supply and high demand, the price can be set higher than it usually would be. Now, what does this have to do with rent costs? Inflation. There are two main causes of inflation as it relates to supply and demand: demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Demand pull inflation is when the overall demand of an object increases while supply remains the same, causing the price to rise, thereby decreasing the purchasing power of money. During the pandemic, sales for hand sanitizer grew by over 70%, which caused the price to rise, thereby causing inflation. Cost push inflation, on the other hand, is when the cost to produce a good increases, thereby increasing the price and decreasing the value of money. The oil crisis of 1973, where many Middle Eastern and North African countries had established an oil embargo against many other nations, led to a decreased supply and an increase in the cost of oil and oil-related products. This was one of many causes for what became known as the Great Inflation of the 1970s. The less valuable money is, the more it takes to buy the same things. Things like oil, hand sanitizer, and yes, even rent. That being said, what is there to do to combat the increasing rent prices? Several short-term solutions have been proposed, ranging from helpful to literally the worst possible thing that we could do. I mean, oh my god. In July of this year, President Biden announced a plan to curb the effects of rent increase, which would involve limiting the amount landlords may increase rent by 5%, while simultaneously constructing more housing. While housing construction is obviously helpful, increasing supply would decrease price. The rent increase limit is only a mild, temporary solution, like a band-aid. It wouldn't really help those who can't afford rent as it is now, and the only enforcement of the limit is the risk of losing tax breaks. The risk. No fines, not even a guarantee, just the possibility of repercussions. With the new presidency on its way, we can't really be promised anything. President-elect Trump has announced that he would also construct more housing, but has also cited mass deportation as a solution. Mass deportation would technically free up more space, but would also drive up labor costs, thereby causing cost-push inflation. And also, that's just an awful thing to do. I mean, come on. So you might be asking me, Jazz, what else can be done? Are we doomed to a life of ever-increasing rent? Well, fear not. There are a few tested solutions, things that, before researching this video, I had not even heard of. Manufactured home communities, typically called trailer parks, are owned by a landlord or by a renting company. When a community is sold, rent increases dramatically, since those who own the houses have to rent the land below them. This sucks, especially because the people living there have no say in whether the park is sold and to whom. And considering around 20 million people, which is just above 6% of the population, live in mobile home parks, this affects a large chunk of Americans. So why don't we just take the Lord out of the land? That is to say, what if the people who owned the homes actually owned the homes, as well as the land they sit on? This is exactly what a resident-owned community is. Generally, they form when a landlord or company who owns the community is bought out, either by the residents themselves or by the state and local government, and ownership is given to the people of the community. They are shown to be incredibly helpful to the economy as they incentivize banks to provide mortgages to those moving into one, and they allow residents to make decisions regarding health and safety in their communities. That's all well and good, but what about for those who would prefer to have more temporary housing? Say, those who aren't ready or able to commit to essentially purchasing an entire house. Imagine, if you would, you live in an apartment complex. You live your daily life without a say in how your building is run. If your landlord wants to increase your rent by 10% because they feel like it, tough. Better pay up by the end of the month or you'll never be able to rent anywhere again. But what if, by renting an apartment, you actually become part of a community? Cooperative-owned housing is exactly what it sounds like. Similar to the workers in a cooperative-owned business, residents have a share of the apartment and are, therefore, in control of operations of the complex. So rather than rent profits going towards lining the pockets of the landlord, they are used exclusively to pay for expenses, and the residents collectively get to decide what to do with those profits, whether it be towards an emergency repair fund, a new pool, or a new park, or maybe an esports arena. The possibilities are endless. Furthermore, co-op-owned buildings tend to have significantly lower rent, since nobody is collecting profits. The largest problem preventing those who may benefit the most from living in a cooperative-owned housing community is that they have grown increasingly popular, so much so that they are just out of vacancy. Now, there are ways these communities have attempted to combat this, such as setting a maximum income limit for new residents, and this has seen some success. But it would help a lot more if there were simply more of these communities available, and especially if they were more accessible to lower class communities. Now, there was a lot that we covered in this video, but there still remains more to be discussed. As a society, we need to examine whether or not this class system of landlord-tenant is even viable, and what our alternatives are. It is clear that the current system is not in our best interest, and that there are other options. It's just up to us to take the leap. Thank you all so much for watching. I don't usually make videos like these. This is my first video essay, and it has been a little bit stressful. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, please let me know in the comments and by liking and subscribing. I might make more of these for fun, who knows. Anyway, that about does it for today. I'll see you all later. Peace.